He said the word guaranteed, like it was sacred, like it meant something beyond what words normally mean. His name was Adrian Cole, and for 10 years he'd managed my finances, or so I thought. You've worked hard, Clara. He'd smiled across his mahogany desk, his voice warm and confident. Let your money do the same. I was 62 then, newly retired from a library, and I'd spent 40 years being careful with every single dollar. After my husband, Arthur, died, I learned to be even more careful. Arthur was an accountant, a man who believed in ledgers and balanced checkbooks, and I had honored his memory by living by his rules. But Adrian wore confidence, like cologne. His office smelled like leather and expensive, dark roast coffee. The folders were embossed with gold lettering. The carpet was so thick my feet sank into it, hushing my footsteps. Everything in that room whispered trust and security. I signed where he pointed. Documents slid across his polished desk like promises made in stone. I didn't read every single word. I trusted him. That was my first mistake, though really my only mistake was believing someone could spend a decade managing money without having integrity. When you've lived a life of arithmetic and order, of careful accounting, you believe other people have too. You think numbers don't lie because you've never let yourself be lied to. 3 months later, I checked my account online at midnight, unable to sleep. My hands went cold. Half my life savings had vanished without explanation. Market fluctuations, Clara. He chuckled when I called the next morning, his voice smooth and practiced. His tone suggested I was foolish for noticing, like a child worried about shadows in daylight. You have to think long-term, he continued, as if patience would make the money reappear. Long-term had never meant disappearing money in my accounting mind. I'd watched money carefully my whole life. It didn't just evaporate like morning dew on glass. These aren't savings accounts, Clara. They're investments. They move, he explained, his voice oozing a patronizing calm. Long-term means patience, he continued smoothly, his words flowing like honey. The investments will recover. Trust the process. Trust me. I hung up without saying goodbye, staring at my old oak bookshelf where Arthur's retirement plan once sat, neatly organized in clear folders, perfectly labeled in his careful handwriting, perfectly safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened a fresh, college-ruled notebook and wrote at the top in my careful librarian's handwriting, debts and debtors. Underneath, I began listing every transaction I could remember, every deposit made, every withdrawal taken, every number that didn't add up correctly. My brain wanted to organize chaos into sense. Adrian had taught me one thing useful. Numbers don't lie. People do. That was when I stopped being angry and started being systematic. Adrian invited me to a client appreciation dinner at the Riverside Hotel ballroom downtown. Black tie required. Champagne flowed everywhere. A room full of people in silk and arrogance, their voices rising like an orchestra tuning instruments. He stood on stage under bright lights, boasting about financial freedom and maximizing your golden years, while I sipped watery, metallic-tasting champagne, watching carefully. Every smile in that ballroom was purchased. Every laugh was currency. Every compliment was an investment calculated to pay dividends. I saw faces I recognized, other retirees, widows like myself, all looking at him with a kind of desperate hope. I realized, watching his easy gestures, his confident swagger, that every one of these people was holding their breath, trusting numbers to strangers. We were all terrified, just hiding it better than others. Adrian stood under the spotlight, glowing with success that wasn't his. It was ours. He'd taken our careful savings, our 401k, our legacies, and worn them like a designer suit. When our eyes met across the crowded room, he winked at me. Confident, dismissive, superior. It was a wink that said, "See? Everything is fine. Stop worrying, little lady." My stomach turned to ice. That was the moment I stopped being his client and became his problem. The first bill came from a loan company I'd never heard of, Pinnacle Investments Group, official letterhead. In my name. My hands trembled as I read the demand for $15,000. You co-signed for a commercial property development in Portland. The board, bureaucratic voice on the phone said. My voice trembled. There must be a mistake. I've never even been to Portland. But when I dug through the thick files Adrian had given me, there was my signature. Except it wasn't really my signature. The baseline was wrong. The loop on my C was too perfect. The pressure of my pen should have created a certain depth on the paper, an indentation. This signature was flat, printed, probably scanned from somewhere else. My hands shook with something beyond anger. It was violation. Adrian had forged my name. Not once. Multiple times. I called him immediately, my voice steady despite the trembling in my fingers. Adrian, I need to speak with you about Pinnacle. He called back within an hour, sounding buoyant, pleased. You found out about the investment. You'll thank me later, Clara. Once it pays off, you'll see. It's a guaranteed winner. His confidence was radioactive, burning everything it touched. I hung up without speaking. But I wasn't planning to thank him. I was planning to audit him completely. I spent weeks rummaging through old binders and emails, piecing together every document I'd ever signed. My quiet living room became a war office. Papers stuffed in folders everywhere. Receipts yellowed with age. Quarterly statements that made no sense, which I now realized was by design. My librarian skills kicked in. Organization, pattern recognition, cross-referencing, the ability to find what's hidden in plain sight. I sorted by date, by company, by transaction type. I made a new ledger. Buried between statements from March and April was one page I didn't recognize immediately. My signature, yes. But the font looked different. The spacing was wrong, the margins slightly off. The pen pressure was inconsistent. Someone had scanned my actual signature from a routine advisory agreement and digitally pasted it here, onto a high-risk loan guarantee. A perfect forgery if you weren't looking carefully. I held it up to the light, comparing it to my real signature on my driver's license. The difference was obvious, once you looked closely. How had I not seen this before? My hand shook, not from age, but from a cold, precise rage building in my chest like a storm. And suddenly, his guaranteed smile made perfect, poisonous sense. He'd been stealing from me systematically, carefully for years. I arrived at his office unannounced on a Tuesday morning, my bag containing copies of every forged document, neatly organized in labeled tabs. His assistant, Jessica, smiled too sweetly. Mr. Cole's in a meeting, she chirped, though I could see his door was open. I glanced inside and saw him laughing with a new client, an elderly man, wire-rimmed glasses, pension papers spread on the desk in front of him, about to sign something. My chest tightened. Another victim waiting. Another life savings about to become market fluctuation. I looked back at Jessica. Tell him Clara Vance stopped by, I said quietly. He'll remember me. The assistant's smile wavered. She recognized something in my voice. Not anger, but certainty. Not desperation, but purpose. The look of a librarian who has found the incorrect reference and intends to fix it. I walked back out into the morning sun without waiting, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't need to confront him today. I'd already made my decision about what came next. I'd already decided on the path forward. I'd already begun planning my own counter-investment. Because by tomorrow, he'd never forget me again. I met with an independent accountant, a young woman named Naomi whose office was clean and sparse, all metal and glass, nothing like Adrian's theater of luxury. It smelled like printer toner and Windex, not coffee and leather. I handed her the files carefully, watching her face. She frowned at every document, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad with increasing intensity. She didn't schmooze, she just read. He's been charging hidden management fees, she said finally, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. And using your portfolio to back private investments you never authorized. I asked what that meant in plain language. She looked at me quietly over her glasses, choosing her words carefully. It means he's gambling with your retirement money. He's using your savings as collateral for his own high-risk business ventures. If he wins, he gets rich. If he loses, she trailed off, gesturing to my files. He loses your money. My voice came out small and hollow. Is that legal? She shook her head slowly. Not in the slightest. It's fraud. And gamblers always lose eventually. When I returned to confront Adrian with Naomi's findings, his office was empty. The blinds were drawn, the expensive leather furniture was gone, and the phones were disconnected. He'd vanished like smoke. I stood in the stale air, surrounded by ghosts of trust and old coffee receipts, the carpet still bearing the rectangular indentations where his mahogany desk had been. He's on vacation, the building manager muttered when I asked, barely looking up from his paper. Cleared out last Thursday. Movers came at night. He chewed on a toothpick. Somewhere expensive, I heard. The Caymans, maybe. My jaw clenched with understanding. He wasn't on vacation. He was on the run. He was using my money, and God knows who else's, to fund his escape. I called Naomi immediately from the empty lobby, my voice controlled. He's gone, I said. She wasn't surprised. They usually run when they realize you've figured it out, she said calmly. But they're never as gone as they think they are. They always leave a trail. That's when I realized I wasn't done. I was just beginning. I started calling his other clients, found their names in old directories and online retirement community research. It took time. I was a librarian. I knew how to research. Most were women. All older than me. All embarrassed to speak about it. He said it was temporary. One, a Mrs. Henderson, sobbed over the phone. He said he'd fix it. That it was just a market adjustment. Their shame made them silent, but I wasn't ashamed. I was furious. I spent 2 weeks gathering stories, names, amounts lost. 42 women, ranging in age from 58 to 87. Losses totaling nearly $3 million total. I created a spreadsheet because I was a librarian because I understood that chaos organized becomes evidence. Each woman's loss was a data point. Each story was a cell in a row. Columns for date of investment, amount lost, excuse given by AC, and forged document. Together, they formed a pattern too large and too predatory to ignore. It wasn't just me. It was a systematic culling. By the end of the week, I had a list and the beginning of a plan. At the police station, the officer barely looked up from his keyboard. The air smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. You sign the documents, ma'am, he said flatly, his voice carrying the dismissal of a man who'd heard it all before. His name tag read SGT Miller. Civil case, not criminal. My throat tightened with frustration. The forged signatures meant nothing to him. But my signature was forged, I said carefully, pointing to the evidence in my folder. He shrugged his shoulders, a heavy, indifferent movement. Happens every day. You need to hire a lawyer for civil court. Prove it's a forgery, prove intent. It's your word against his. My voice rose slightly. So, he gets away with it? He commits fraud, steals from 42 women, and simply leaves town. He returned his keyboard without answering, the clacking of the keys filling the silence. Happens every day, he repeated, as if that answered everything. I stood there for a full minute, invisible, before turning and walking out. That's when I stopped waiting for justice and started creating it myself. I stayed up until dawn writing my story, every detail, every receipt, every deceit documented in careful, chronological prose. I posted it on retirement forums anonymously, how my financial advisor stole my retirement, and how to check if yours is, too. Within hours, it exploded. Women began responding with their own stories. Within a day, I had messages from retirees across the country. Some recognized Adrian's name from their own experiences. Some recognized his exact methods, the guaranteed investments, the Pinnacle shell company, the forged loan documents. By nightfall, I'd received 37 emails from people who'd lost money to him, separate from the ones I'd already found. The comment section filled with "me too," and he did exactly this to my mother. The story went viral through the quiet networks where older people gather, not flashy social media, but serious financial planning and AARP forums where people talked about real losses and devastating betrayals. And one of them had something Adrian never meant for us to find. One woman, Margaret, from Seattle, a retired programmer, shared screenshots from a joint investment portal Adrian had accidentally left logged in before he disappeared. She'd noticed something odd and screenshotted everything carefully. I followed the digital trail like it was a library catalog system. It was a maze. Shell companies with names like Pinnacle Holdings and Evergreen Capital Management, all registered in Delaware or the Caymans. Fake accounts with official-looking statements printed on letterhead, designed to be mailed to clients while he siphoned the real money. False loans in clients' names. Property titles that didn't belong to anyone real. He'd built an empire of theft disguised as financial strategy. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't negligence or carelessness. This was an artist's work, systematic, beautiful in its complexity, deliberately constructed to confuse and intimidate. But even artists leave fingerprints. His mistake was assuming a librarian would know how to follow a paper trail, even a digital one. He'd underestimated the organizational skills of the people he was robbing. And I knew exactly where to look. I booked a spot at a financial compliance seminar held by the State Banking Board. It was in a drab downtown hotel ballroom, smelling of industrial carpet and weak coffee. I registered under a fake name, Clara Cole, assistant to Adrian Cole. They welcomed me without question. Another employee, another administrative body filling seats. The name badge felt heavy on my blouse. I smiled politely through lectures on ethics and compliance, on fiduciary duty and client protection, taking meticulous notes. In my tote bag sat a USB drive containing every forged contract, every falsified statement, every screenshot from Margaret, every document that proved Adrian's crimes, all neatly sorted into folders. The keynote speaker was a federal investigator who specialized in financial crimes against elderly people. I raised my hand during the Q&A section, my voice quiet but clear. What's the statute of limitations on investment fraud, specifically when it involves forged signatures across multiple states? I asked. The investigator's eyes met mine with sudden, sharp interest. By the end of that seminar, so did he, and he was asking for my USB drive. That night, my phone rang. A low, confident, no-nonsense voice introduced itself. Mrs. Vance? This is Investigator Marcus Doyle with the Federal Trade Commission. You've caught our attention. I held my breath, waiting. He asked for every file, every screenshot, every email I'd collected. We've been tracking Adrian Cole for months, he said carefully. We knew he was dirty, but he's slippery. He covers his tracks well. Your documentation, this is the Rosetta Stone. This just gave us the missing pieces. The evidence we needed. For the first time in a year, I felt something dangerous rising in my chest. It wasn't just anger, it was cold, sharp hope. What happens now? I asked quietly, my hand gripping the receiver. He smiled through the phone. I could hear it, a crisp, professional sound. Now we build a case together. We're going to set a trap. And you're not alone anymore, Mrs. Vance. For the first time, I wasn't alone. I had the U.S. government as my co-conspirator. Adrian called me 3 days later. He must have heard from his network that I was asking questions, or perhaps the FTC had already frozen one of his ancillary accounts. Clara, he sighed, his voice dripping with practiced, wounded performance. I hear you've been upset. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Let's meet. We can work this out. I'll make it right. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a vibrating, electric anticipation. Of course, Adrian, I said sweetly, channeling the naive widow he thought I was. I was so worried. Let's meet where it all began. The coffee shop on 5th Street. Tomorrow noon. He agreed immediately, probably relieved. A meeting meant reconciliation. A meeting meant he could charm his way out of this, like he'd charmed his way into my life for 10 years. He didn't realize the meeting room was already wired for sound by federal agents watching from a van across the street. He didn't realize I wasn't coming to reconcile. I was coming to take his confession. He arrived smug, in an expensive suit, likely purchased with my savings. He'd even ordered my favorite tea, a jasmine green, and had it waiting. You overreacted, he said, sitting across from me, his voice a low, comforting purr. It's all temporary. A cash flow issue. You need to trust the process. I tilted my head calmly, meeting his eyes. So, you temporarily forged my signature on the Pinnacle loan? He laughed, actually laughed at my question, a short, barking sound. Oh, come now, Clara. Don't be dramatic. That was just paperwork to secure the leveraged position. It's standard. The red light on my pen, nestled next to my notebook, blinked once, unseen by him. Every word was being recorded. Every admission. Every excuse. Every lie. He leaned forward, reaching for my hands in a gesture meant to comfort. You know I only wanted what was best for you. That's when I smiled, the same empty, confident way he used to smile at me. And I watched him finally notice the pen. He lunged for the pen, his mask of charm dissolving into raw panic. I stood, calm and steady, moving away from him. The table wobbled, spilling his coffee. You think anyone will believe you? He hissed, his face flushing a blotchy, ugly red. A lonely old widow against my reputation? That word, widow, cut deep. But it also freed me. I'd spent so long being the vulnerable one, the one who needed protecting, the one he had marked as an easy target. You're right, I said quietly, my voice carrying steel across the suddenly quiet coffee shop. They won't believe just me. They won't need to. Two men in suits, Investigator Doyle among them, were already moving toward our table, their badges out. They'll believe the recording. And they'll believe the 42 other women on my spreadsheet. He looked from me to the agents, his mouth open. They'll believe the news tomorrow. By morning, the recording was everywhere. Financial forums, local news broadcasts, Reddit threads titled The Man Who Scammed Grandmothers. The Washington Post picked it up. So did NPR. It became the Cole collapse, a case study in elder financial exploitation. The audio was devastating. His smooth assurances, my calm question, his dismissive laugh about forgery, and then the sound of the scuffle. His firm's website crashed under traffic from angry investors. The few remaining investors fled immediately. Former clients called for prosecution. The state licensing board suspended his credentials, pending investigation. Adrian became radioactive. No one returned his calls. The comfortable, luxurious life he'd built on stolen retirement money evaporated in 48 hours. He'd been reduced from a financial guru to a common thief, exposed by a librarian's ballpoint pen. And Adrian? He was still calling me from a burner phone, voice breaking, begging for meetings, promising to return everything. I let it go to voicemail. The same police officer from before, Sergeant Miller, showed up at my door 2 weeks later. He held his hat in his hands. Mrs. Vance, he said sheepishly, no longer dismissive, no longer bored. We're reopening your case. I offered him tea. We sat in my kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows I could now afford to fix. Civil, wasn't it? I asked gently, pouring the hot water. He sighed deeply, accepting the cup. Not anymore. The FBI found the offshore accounts in the Caymans. Property titles in Portland, falsified tax returns. This is federal now. Wire fraud, mail fraud, racketeering. My hands stayed steady around my own teacup. I looked at him over the rim. What happens to him? The officer met my eyes. Prison. Minimum 5 years, probably more depending on sentencing. They have him cold, thanks to you. Adrian wasn't just broke. He was cornered. Naomi called me, her voice trembling with controlled excitement. They've seized his assets, Clara. Everything he hid. The properties, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, all of it. It's in receivership. She paused, taking a breath. The authorities might recover part of your funds. After liquidation and legal fees, maybe 40%, maybe more. I stared at the sunlight filtering through my curtains, thinking about all the other women. Mrs. Henderson, who had lost her house. Margaret, who had lost her peace of mind. 40% wasn't justice. It was an insult. No, I said softly. I don't want a part. I want all of it recovered. And I want restitution for every victim equally. He doesn't get to declare bankruptcy and walk away. There was silence on the line. Then Naomi, the pragmatic accountant, understood what I was really saying. A civil suit, she whispered. I knew exactly how to make that happen. I filed a class action civil suit on behalf of every woman Adrian had defrauded, 42 plaintiffs total, each with their own stories, all backed by my spreadsheet. The courtroom filled with trembling hands and steady eyes. Women who'd spent their whole lives being careful, being quiet, only to have that care rewarded with betrayal. We filled the first 3 rows. Adrian arrived disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his new, court-appointed lawyer sweating. When the judge asked for opening remarks, I stood. My voice didn't shake. It was my librarian voice, the one that commanded quiet. Your Honor, I said, we are 42 women. We are teachers, nurses, and librarians. We were taught to save. We were taught to trust. We just never learned how to forgive theft. The courtroom was silent. From that moment forward, it was mine. Adrian tried to charm the jury. He smiled at them. He joked carefully. He even cried on cue during his testimony, wiping his eyes with rehearsed sadness, talking about market forces and his desire to help these wonderful ladies. I watched him, the same performance he'd used on me for 10 years. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth plainly.
No dramatics.
Just facts. Numbers. Documents. Evidence. I presented my spreadsheet on an overhead projector. On this date, he told Mrs. Henderson the market was adjusting. On the same date, he transferred her $80,000 to his shell company in Delaware. I let the silence and the data speak louder than his theatrics. When I finished, even his lawyer looked away. The jury had seen the real Adrian now, not the smooth advisor, but the architect of theft and manipulation. And then the next witness was called, his old assistant, Jessica. She testified that Adrian had forged client signatures under her watch. She was terrified, but she had been given immunity. He told me no one would notice, she said, trembling on the stand. He said it was standard procedure for large investments. I believed him. The defense lawyer jumped up. You're admitting to forgery? I was just following orders, she whispered. He had me practice their signatures. He kept a file. She choked back a sob. He said the older clients, their hands shook, so it was better if I cleaned them up for the bank.
The courtroom gasped.
Adrian went pale, a sickly, greenish white. He realized then his insurance policy, his insurance witness, the person who had protected him, had become his downfall. I almost felt pity for him in that moment. Almost. But pity doesn't balance ledgers. Judgment does. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a woman who looked like a high school principal, didn't meet Adrian's eyes. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of elder financial exploitation, we find the defendant guilty. Adrian's mouth opened, but no words came. The judge nodded slowly. The court finds you liable for restitution totaling $2,847,000 to the plaintiffs. This will be paid in full from your seized assets before any other creditors. You will also serve 7 years in federal prison. The gavel struck once, echoing through the courtroom like poetry. Adrian's lawyers began whispering frantically. The federal agents moved toward him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. He still thought he could talk his way out of it. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final visit. I visited him in county jail 2 weeks later, before his transfer. He looked older, smaller somehow. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap orange jumpsuit. The confidence had evaporated, leaving only a bitter, petty residue. You ruined me, he spat through the glass. I smiled, calm and slow.
No, Adrian.
You did this yourself. The numbers were wrong. I just helped the ledgers balance. I stood, ready to leave. Before I went, I placed an envelope on the counter, facing him. Inside was a copy of the check I'd just deposited into a new trust account, the restitution fund, distributed to all 42 victims equally. Our money returned. He once taught me to trust the numbers. Now he could spend his years counting the days. He pressed his palm against the glass, his mouth working, but I was already walking away, the automatic door buzzing open in front of me. Some ledgers, once balanced, stay balanced forever.